hope I will be given the opportunity to share with you some new insights about the 19th century. Because, well, last time we finished with 18th century, and the conclusive remark was that this 18th century was static. You know, there was no dynamism in those philosophical systems, whether of Spinoza, well, of Leibniz. Um, uh, well, if we take the 17th century, the situation is the same with Descartes or with Newton or with Spinoza. We have no dynamism. There are we are sort of at a loss what to expect even from Spinoza. Well, we don't know. His world is static. Well, now Leibniz tried to show some dynamism, but also because his world was sort of chosen from all eternity. So this predestined harmony, preordained harmony, was also somehow static, and his monads also. So Voltaire was a little bit skeptical about everything, about the existence of God, the immortality of the soul, and perhaps also about the progress of humanity. So he was concluded his candide with a modest proposal to cultivate your own garden. With Boscovich, you remember also there was no dynamism. Even Boscovich tried to exclude the catastrophe, the sort of clustering or contraction of the Newtonian world. So by introducing some new force of repulsion at the most great distances. So with Kant also, you remember we had these antinomies and Kantian skepticism about the um, possibilities of the human reason, and we concluded with this sort of discourse or chat with Karamzin, a Russian traveler, and uh, what Kant could say to Karamzin was not about progress or not about development, but just to be moral man, live with peace, with live in peace with your conscience, and try to expect perhaps some future enumeration in the next world. So here we have no dynamism. Well, in the 19th century, the situation has radically changed. First of all, we but so there were, well, maybe in the 18th century there were some sort of how to say first signs of this perhaps progressive development of human race. And they were connected with this I think term or like notion, which is known as enlightenment. Well, enlightenment, the root is light. So enlightenment is just propagation of light, like say the sunrise, the metaphor of sunrise. So the sun rises and the darkness dissipates. Okay, so light overcomes darkness little by little. So if we take this metaphor of sunrise, we can see that how darkness sort of gives way to light. So light is victorious. Well, this metaphor was used to illustrate the events in human society. So the ambitious project of French encyclopedists was to sort of disseminate light of knowledge, light of reason. And the same when Kant wrote his famous work, What is Enlightenment, where, by the way, he cited Horatio, sapere aude. For those who finished Moscow Physical Technical Institute, it's perhaps a known like motto, sapere aude. It's Latin, it means just have courage to think independently, okay? So, well, this enlightenment perhaps contained in its core this idea of development because of this light sort of propagates and darkness sort of gives way to light. And in this way, they appeared for the first time at the end of the 18th century in the works of a certain man, Condorcet. I will write in chat, Marquis de Condorcet, French representative of this French movement of enlightenment. In 1795, there appeared the work of Condorcet, which is called, well, I will translate it in English, Sketch for a Historical Picture of the Progress of the Human Mind. Okay, well, it is too difficult to write in chat so long. Well, we can say a picture of the progress of the human mind. Well, the key word here is progress or progress, progrès in French. So progress. Well, it comes from Latin verb progredere, which means to move further. Well, so progredere, and that says progressus. So, well, so this in this work, Condorcet gives us a picture how human civilization, little by little, passing through 10 periods, seemed to move in the direction of learning and rights of man, dignity of man, and so on. And the reaction which he associated with the superstition, little by little has to sort of move away from this progress of this moving of human reason. So reason little by little achieves success, and first in France because of French Revolution, before that in America, thanks to American Revolution. So, and even before the political changes, there were changes in science. Condorcet mentions Galileo, Descartes, or well, all our heroes of which we spoke during our 5th and 6th lectures. It is interesting that Condorcet also gives these 3 names, Bacon, Galileo, and Descartes, as like the moving spirits of this progress. So we were, according to Condorcet, we were not wrong in selecting these names and as you like this verb, elaborating on them, okay, during our 5th and 6th lectures. So, well, of course, Condorcet doesn't pay any attention to Immanuel Kant because, he didn't, seems that he didn't consider him an important figure. Also, well, he is, he speaks about Leibniz and Newton, of course. Of course, he didn't say any word about Boscovich. So, well, we can, of course, criticize Condorcet for not mentioning everybody and not understanding, perhaps, well, the future outcome of progress. Condorcet was very optimistic, although his life sort of gave him a lesson, sort of. He died in prison because he was imprisoned by his comrades, revolutionaries. You remember there was a great terror and many figures of French Revolution like Danton and even Robespierre died were executed by um, uh, a new device called guillotine. Okay, so well, Condorcet was not executed. He died in prison. Perhaps he committed suicide because he kept the poison well with him always. But well, there are other versions. Well, he was found dead in his prison cell. So it was in 1794, and next year after his death appeared his work, which we have already mentioned. So this date, 1795, can be the date of the beginning of this progressive ideology, the ideology of progress. But it was also, you see, this ideology of progress was without this idea of struggle of contradictions. It was just a successive motion toward some goal, like rising of the sun. Again, I remind you this metaphor. So sun rises like not by fits and starts, not by some revolutions and radical change jumps, or but just like well, uninterruptedly, okay, continuously, we can say. So this progress was regarded as continuous, and there was no idea what was the progress. We should wait for a little bit for Hegel, a German philosopher who first expressed this idea that the moving force of every progress, and he started with the progress of the so-called world spirit or absolute spirit, is contradiction. Well, you will remember we spoke a lot about contradictions, starting from Democritus, where there was a contradiction of the existence and the simultaneous non-existence of void. Also, we touched this theme when we spoke about Nicholas of Cusa and his Coincidentia Oppositorum. But in Democritus and in Nicholas of Cusa, they lacked this idea of progress. So take Nicholas of Cusa, he didn't connect the progressive development of human race, which if he had this idea of progress, it was just purely Christian, the idea of the sort of dissemination of Christian good news throughout the world. This can be also called a kind of a progress, but it was in the frames of a Christian ideology. And of course, this progress was not connected with contradictions. So contradictions were just for philosophy, and Christianity as itself remained contradictory free, because well, if we use the metaphor which the Christians widely use, that Jesus Christ is like a son of reason or a son of justice. So again, the sunrise, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So it also is like something like continuous, um, well, and without any kind of, well, of course there was this idea of the devil and the like forces of darkness, okay, powers of darkness, but it was a little bit underplayed because devil was considered to be a creation of God, so it was not a force just of the same value or say power as God. So well, maybe we can associate devil of Christianity with a superstition of Voltaire and Condorcet. So these are negligible forces which cannot withstand this progress of light, okay? Be it Jesus Christ or be it light of reason. Well, with Hegel, it was quite another story. Hegel, already in his thesis, which he defended in Jena in 1801, and here I can ask Marina to show us the slide of Hegel's work, his thesis. They were published in Latin, so maybe we will. Marina, can you show us the slides concerning Hegel, so that we could see this just printed?
Okay, I'm looking for it.
It's okay.
Yes, I think I have it.
Okay, no problem. I have some difficulties, I think, with internet. There is some inscription that your internet connection is not, how to say, устойчивый. It's
Stable.
well, okay. Here you see, it's not stable, of course. No, I'm a little bit sort of nervous. That's why I forget very simple English words. But oh no, this is not the previous one was okay. Yes, here here's to the left you see a thesis. There are 12, and the first one the thesis which he defended. Then he gave the dissertation on the orbit of planets. So if you take the first thesis, you will see contradictio est regula veri, non contradictio falsi. So contradiction is a rule of truth, and non-contradiction is a rule of falsity. So if we want to find some truth, we have to find the contradiction. If there's no contradiction, there's no truth without contradiction. Okay, this is well, and well, to the right we see in German the description of meeting of very interesting meeting of Hegel and Heine, Heinrich Heine, a famous poet of Jewish descent. So Heine, or in Russian it's Heine, he when he met Hegel, well, like we can compare a meeting of Karamzin with Kant. But here, quite another story happened when Heine asked Hegel about the stars. Well, perhaps these stars are the abodes of the blessed souls, and perhaps after our death we can live at some distant star planet and continue our life sort of after death. Hegel was very skeptical about this idea of Heine and said, well, stars, there's nothing in them. Well, what is this next life? Do you want to be remunerated that you cared for your ill mother, or cared for your elderly mother and didn't kill your brother? So you want some tips, you want some remuneration for that. So he was very skeptical about future life, and Heine said that he felt it very acutely. And after saying this to Heine, Hegel sort of moved his head around just to see that nobody observed them. So Hegel was afraid that somebody will hear his remark and perhaps denounce him as a not faithful Christian, okay? Because his reputation before the emperor and the police and the ministry of religion was very high. So he played like a double role. So before the authorities, he was a a Christian of solid reputation. And his philosophy, he said, was to defend Christianity. But in private judgment, as in or in private talks like the talk with Heine, he just gave way to his radical skepticism and even distaste for Christianity and its idea of remuneration and future life. If you remember, Kant spoke quite the other way. Kant spoke just spoke with Karamzin, telling him that perhaps he can expect something in future life if he will be faithful here to his conscience or moral imperative. So you see this, well, from here you can understand, from this comparison of Hegel and Kant, which will pass through this whole lecture perhaps, you will understand that secretly Hegel despised Kant for his static and, he said, also flat philosophy. And his philosophy was like dynamic, and we can say three-dimensional. If we can say that the philosophy of Kant was two-dimensional or flat, then we can say that Hegel's philosophy was three-dimensional. What was this third dimension? It was this idea of development, of evolution, of well, he didn't use the term evolution, he used the term development, but it is more or less the same. So there's this idea of development, and now he formulated also the sort of force that promotes this development. This force is contradiction. So contradiction now becomes now plays the role of the like moving force of all development. So you can later, you will see that the same idea works for Charles Darwin, because with Charles Darwin we see also the contradiction or the struggle for life as the basis of evolution. And if we return to this peaceful idea of progress, like idea of Condorcet, so we can find an analog in biology with the philosophy of zoology of Lamarck. With Lamarck, there is no struggle for life. This is just a step-by-step development and like bettering of all organs, or by you remember we spoke about cultivating the garden, and one of the students mentioned Lamarck, that there is something Lamarckian in this idea of cultivating the garden, and sort of yes, you hear me? Do you hear me well, Marina? It's okay. So
Yes, fine.
okay, so yes, okay. So this is we can sort of make a little table of those philosophers who were regarding contradiction as the source of all development, and the philosophers who do not regard contradiction as a just necessary attribute of, say, development or progress, and who consider progress to be sort of compared with the rising of the sun. So we will just speak about them later, but I just want to enumerate them. So those who were the defenders of this idea of step-by-step progress without contradiction, they were Condorcet, whom I already mentioned, then Fichte, a German philosopher who formulated his own idea of development by 5 stages in 1806. Then we'll speak about him. Then the Lamarck, um, his philosophy of zoology 1809, and Auguste Comte, the last one. Auguste Comte, the father of positivism. I mentioned him briefly in my previous lecture on Tuesday, but now we'll speak more about him. So Auguste Comte and his course in positive philosophy, which the first volume of which appeared in 1830. So you see, these are Condorcet, Fichte, Lamarck, and Comte are representatives of this like continuous progress without contradiction, without struggle, without revolutions, without radical changes or jumps. And now we have another sort of set of philosophers developed the idea of progress with contradictions. And this is Hegel, Feuerbach, Marx, Karl Marx, Darwin, and well, to some extent also Nietzsche, but we'll speak about Nietzsche separately. So I think these four are enough: Hegel, Feuerbach, Marx, and Darwin. So for all of them, the moving force of progress is constant struggle and a contradiction. Well, for Darwin it was struggle, for Marx it was class struggle, for Feuerbach and Hegel it was contradiction of, say, well, in contradiction of either of human spirit or of matter. So everywhere they tried to find contradiction. Well, I hope you still are listening to me, because here it is written that my net has low,
It's fine.
yes, low velocity of transmitting information. In Russian, низкая пропускная способность сети. But I'm sorry, Javier perhaps will not understand it. Well, for Javier, I will, or other foreigners who are listening to me. Okay, so, well, so, okay. So, well, you see, we are always in this world where everything can happen, and we are all nervous that the worst will happen or anytime. So we should overcome some sort of our nervousness and believe in progress of the human race, okay, or in progress of, like Condorcet put it, progress of the human mind, okay. Well, so, and progress of technology, of course. Now we will just speak a little bit about Hegel again. So Hegel started from this inaugural thesis, and by defending his thesis, at first he defended these 12 theses, and it was oral speech and oral discussion. Then he promised to write the text of his thesis. It was devoted to the orbits of the planets, also written in Latin, because at that time in Jena University, I don't know, maybe in other universities they have already passed to vernacular languages, as say in the Universe of Prague, but in the more conservative Universe of Jena, you understand Jena? It's a town in Germany where there was a famous battle won by Napoleon over the Prussian forces in 1806, of which Hegel was an eyewitness. So how Napoleon triumphantly entered Jena. So Jena is famous for its university also. So in these traditions of this university, the thesis had to be defended in Latin. Hegel mastered Latin very well. Later in his life, he even just played with the idea of going to Amsterdam and delivering lectures in Latin there because he didn't knew Dutch language. So there was some negotiations that he will have the chair of philosophy in Amsterdam University and produce his lectures in Latin. Well, for me, it's like a dream that I could have mastered Latin so well as to produce lectures in Latin. But now lectures in Latin are no longer on demand, okay? So perhaps people are, English language is now the language of the scientific community, okay? So at that time, Latin was still had some power. So, well, for Hegel, there was no problem. So he put, as you very well remember from the slide which Marina showed us, that his theses were formulated in Latin, and his text of the work was also written in Latin. It was called the Orbitis Planetarum. Well, I think that, well, and not also I, but say Karl Popper also and many others are very skeptical about sort of natural philosophic abilities of Hegel to understand physics. Well, but this is not theme of our discussion because we are concerned not with the deficiencies of Hegel, but with his strong points. And his strong point was formulated in his the Phenomenology of Spirit, the work which he published in 1807. Just, well, in very, I would say, well, I will say troublesome, but also I would say, uh, well, somehow even disastrous or circumstances, because, well, he already finished his work, The Phenomenology of Spirit. He already finished it in 1806. There were also there were just some phrases just to end, to write the conclusion. The phenomenology of spirit. This work, which contains this idea of spirit, this his work, which contains the whole philosophy of development, progressive development by contradiction, with contradiction as a like driving force of this progress. This work was almost ready in 1806. He prepared it in Jena. But at that time, Napoleon invaded Prussia, and Jena became the battlefield. So there was a great battle near Jena, and Napoleon was victorious. So after this victory, the French troops occupied Jena. So the city was looted, you understand, looted. So French soldiers could do everything they want. They could violate women, or they could just seize the property. Well, they did. Hegel, when he saw first French soldiers, one of them was an officer, and Hegel saw a mark of this order of Legion. So they're on somewhere on their well, and he addressed this officer and said, perhaps you will spare a modest German professor. So, well, he was not violated. I mean, he was not killed or wounded, happily. So, but all his possessions were taken from him. So he was just mm, uh, just turned into misery. Okay, so he was uh, um, stripped, they say, of all his possessions. Okay, by the French troops. So he had to fly from Jena to Bamberg, where he expected the publication of his book. Happily, in Bamberg, this publication took place next year. So, and he flew to Bamberg with some manuscripts, remaining papers of what. Happily, the French didn't destroy his manuscript, so he went to Bamberg and saw to the publication. The publication brought him some money, and also some money was loaned to him by Goethe, the famous playwright, you know, Goethe, the famous poet, German poet, who was in friendly relations with Hegel throughout his life. And we'll speak about that also, because with Hertha we have also a very interesting formulation of the law of contradictions. Well, so, but we'll return to the problem of Goethe later. Now, just, well, I will describe the sufferings of Hegel. So Hegel flew from these French troops, lived very modestly in Bamberg, saw this publication of his work. So this work appeared in, I would say, in stormy circumstances, okay? And it proved to Hegel that he was the eyewitness of that same struggle, or uh, just struggle of contradictions, of which he wrote. So as if he was writing, of course, the contradictions of the spirit, but he saw in Napoleon's wars the, how he said, formulated it later, the absolute spirit mounting a horse. Okay, absolute spirit on mounting, just riding a horse. Okay, so when he saw Napoleon entering triumphantly Jena, he saw him with his own eyes, of course from a distance, because he was afraid that of these French troops, but he just observed, maybe from the balcony, how Napoleon entered Jena, and he said, this is the absolute spirit just riding on a horse. So this remained like a interesting metaphor. Okay, so war, and for Hegel, war was always something positive, because wars are the source of progress, and wars start from contradictions. So here is this core of his philosophy of history. So without wars, without um, enmity, without hatred, there would be no progress. And also without passion. So both love and hatred are passions. So passions rule the world, and passions. Um, Passions are at the core of development. But these passions are not only positive, let's say love of learning, or say uh, moral imperative, just passion for justice, as Christians say. Blessed are those who are, seek justice, who are passionate for justice, because theirs be the kingdom of heaven. So this is not this passion for justice or passion for learning. This is passion in its crudest sense, in which it was later formulated by Darwin, the passion to continue to exist, to survive, passion for survival. Okay, so everybody wants to survive, and in order to survive, then they have to somehow defeat their opponents, okay, defeat their enemies. So here is the passion in its most primitive and most aggressive sense. And so, well, here we have this first example of this theory of progress that comes through contradictions. Of course, we can ask Hegel how it can be that these wars and these evil passions or good passions do not destroy the world, because it seems that these wars can end the world. Like today, we are afraid that the nuclear war will just bring an end to our world and not progress, okay? But at that time, there were no nuclear weapons, and uh, Hegel was a witness of how Napoleon not only sort of brought French civilization and French ideas of human rights, for example, and Republican ideas in general, anti-clerical also, that he developed them, that he brought them to other countries which were sort of en retard, were reactionary. And also Hegel was a witness how of rising German patriotism. So Germans at that time were divided into many small countries. We spoke about Leibniz, that he was from Hanover, but there was also Prussia, there was Bavaria, there were free cities like Bremen or Hamburg, or so all of them were led their independent life, had their own government, and now, because Napoleon subdued all those states, Germans began to feel themselves Germans. So Fichte, who was just a voice, or just proclaiming these patriotic feelings in his speeches to a German nature, he also he addressed, as he said, all those who speak and think in German, whatever country they are from, Bavaria or Prussia or say Hanover. So this doesn't matter if you think and speak in German. So Fichte said, I address to you my speeches. It is a miracle that Fichte was not arrested. These speeches appeared even in print in German in 1808. I don't, maybe that was because Napoleon was victorious, so the Treaty of Tilsit was already signed, and the war, the war ended, and he sort of despised that Prussian, how to say, government and Prussian state for its weakness, and didn't see that perhaps some danger will come to him from this conquered German, Prussian Republic. But so Fichte was allowed to give these lectures in Berlin and even to publish them. And there, as also in his previous work, Fichte also gave his idea of progress. And this idea of progress was also not, this was the idea like that of Condorcet, that of successive, uninterrupted progress of human mind. So the key concepts, there were 5 stages. On the first stage, there was just primitive justice between primitive men. Then appeared the second stage when the justice was, there appeared inequality, so justice was not present, and some authority like that of, say, Moses or Christian church should just govern, keep sort of some moral order by force, and by prejudice. Okay, then when the people became disillusioned with religion, again there became immoral because they had no sort of force that could coerce them to remain moral. So this is, as Dostoevsky says, if God doesn't exist, so all is allowed. Okay, so this is the third stage of like license for evil. But then the human mind begins to think and to see the negative side of this like um, lack of moral order. So there starts the fourth stage, which is called Vernunftwissenschaft, or the the science of the reason. So reason begins to understand that moral behavior is necessary, but it only happens in geniuses, in private individuals like Immanuel Kant. But the fifth stage, which is Vernunftkunst, or technology of reason, then at this fifth stage, these ideas of Kant become to start to penetrate all the fields of human activity, and the golden age is somehow reached or restored. Okay, so these are five stages of progress by Fichte. Well, this is more or less, with this we can just make a pause, and maybe after 5 minutes we'll continue speaking. And Marina, you can leave us if you want, because we will need only the presentation only on the last stage of my lecture. When you reappear, then we can use the presentation. Okay, Marina, so you're free to leave us for an hour, just because you launched already the conference, so it's okay, yes? Now I will just uh, how to say, announce a 5 minutes break, okay? Okay, let's continue. So we stopped on Hegel. And I want to remind you the famous phrase of Nietzsche, ohne Hegel kein Darwin. In German, it's in English, it means without Hegel, there would be no Darwin. Well, maybe it's, you can question it, but it is a celebrate just phrase. Darwin, just I want you just to know about that. So without Hegel, there will be no Darwin. Well, I'm not sure that Darwin was influenced by Hegel. Of course, he was influenced by his own discoveries. But somehow Hegel helped the general public to understand Darwin better, okay? So, and it seems that this like alloy, or this chemical compound sort of Hegel with Darwin was of more force than if Darwin himself, as a naturalist, sort of because part of the success of Darwin was his popularity. I mean, in the general public. So it was needed that the public was sort of reap that could they could understand Darwin. And here I think Hegel played a role, a certain role, and another German philosopher of whom we'll speak later, Schopenhauer, also had his sort of contribution to the popularity of Darwin. Well, Schopenhauer. Well, Schopenhauer will speak about him later a little bit. Just I don't want to hour. So this is one idea, that Hegel sort of paved a way to understanding Darwinian evolution. The second idea is what I mentioned you, what I have mentioned to you, I think, in my previous lecture, is Kant's Hegel's reaction to Kant's antinomies. Well, it is very important. For Kant, antinomies were the witness of the deficiencies of human reason, because reason cannot uh, sort of um, work with contradictions. Um, Contradictions were regarded by Kant as something negative, and but Hegel just put it the other way around. He said, "Well, contradictions, very well. This this my thesis that contradiction is the rule of truth. So if there are contradictions, the better for it. That's this is a sign that there's something of truth here." So for just diametrically opposite reaction. With Kant, these contradictions were a sign of a weakness of a human brain, of human mind. With the Hegel, there were signs that there's something there, some treasure hidden there in these antinomies. So the same with the existence of God. You know that Kant criticized the ideas of the existence of God because there are some contradictions in those uh, proofs of the existence of God. But for Hegel, these contradictions, say, connected with the so-called ontological argument, contradiction between being and non-being, for Hegel, it was just very well God can be and can not be at the same time. So this is not so bad a solution, okay? So because being and non-being are almost the same. If we take just being as a just how to say um, primitive or fundamental um, concept, or just pure being. If we speak about pure being and pure non-being, for Hegel, these are seem to be all the same. So when we say that God exists and we say that God doesn't exist, we are pronouncing more or less the same thing, okay? Because idea of God surely exists. That and the idea, as later Marx would say, if the idea takes the minds of men, then it becomes a real force, okay? So if, well, for example, Hegel produced such an argument. Well, Kant said their imaginary dollars or thalers cannot buy you anything. But Hegel said, if you firmly believe that these imaginary dollars are with you, you can, for example, marry some woman on this idea that you are wealthy, or you can just enter just into some financial enterprises, just take a loan because you imagine that you have these dollars, okay? So your activity is different because the content of your so brain is different. So if you firmly believe, say that God exists, so you can pray for him, to him, and become quiet and not nervous. You know, this ideal of Carnegie, how to stop worrying and start living. So if you are firmly believe in God's providence and in God's love, so you can, of course, stop worrying, yes, and start living. Well, you say that this is imaginary. God really doesn't help you, but your sort of like inner quietness or inner quiet is not imaginary, it's real, okay? And your nervousness before that was real also, not imaginary. So the same are not imaginary but real, these Gothic cathedrals of which I gave you a picture when we spoke about the Middle Ages. They are, of course, not imaginary. And say, the Last Supper of Leonardo da Vinci is not also not imaginary but real picture. Okay, so so this idea can produce real things. Okay, if it holds the mind of man. This is the expression used by what this is the saying of Marx. So if an idea holds not only one man but masses, so if idea sort of possesses the mind of masses, then it can become a real force. Okay, well, this is very Hegelian, of course. So Hegel influenced a lot of people, but the first whom he influenced was Feuerbach. Well, so now he's a little bit forgotten. But when I was a young man, we all had to learn Feuerbach because Marxism was considered to be the best philosophy in the world, and Feuerbach was the precursor of Marx. Okay, so Feuerbach is like a link between Hegel and Marx. Well, what did Feuerbach do with Hegelian dialectics? You know that Hegel started from absolute spirit, so Hegel was an idealist. For Hegel, there are sort of three stages of the development of this absolute spirit. At first, just pure absolute spirit who is not conscious about, who has no consciousness, who has no personality, like the God of Spinoza, somehow distributed among the things of this world. Um, so like a principle of mind, but mind that doesn't comprehend itself, doesn't understand that it is mind. Okay, like you remember with this Neoplatonic idea that sun is the source of all heat, but sun itself is not hot. Okay, so the same with the mind. So mind is this absolute mind or absolute spirit of Hegel is the source of all spirit and of all creation somehow, but it doesn't comprehend itself as a spirit or as a creator. So the second stage is that negation of spirit and the appearance of matter. Well, Hegel sort of a little bit not explicit whether this absolute spirit created matter or if it just appeared from him like an emanation. So I think in secretly, and we can also see it from unpublished work of Hegel, The Spirit of Christianity, and also with his discourse with Heine, which I mentioned before. So we can see that Hegel was not Christian, but in secretly he was Neoplatonist. And for Neoplatonists, there's no question of creation, but there's they describe everything as emanating. So better say that from this absolute spirit emanates matter as something which is radically opposed to a spirit. So there's a first contradiction between spirit and matter. But this creative contradiction makes or creates the third stage, the finite spirit, which is spirit of man and also of Hegel. And in this finite spirit, absolute spirit can comprehend himself. So, and more perfectly with Hegel himself, because Hegel formulated the laws of the development of the absolute spirit. So absolute spirit as himself cannot understand what is happening with him. You know, this is not the God of Thomas Aquinas who can understand himself and the world outside him. This is absolute spirit is here powerless. He cannot understand himself as a spirit. He cannot have this conscious uh, turn down your microphones, Anastasia, for example. Yes, because there's some noise coming. Well, so let's continue with this absolute spirit. So this absolute spirit is like the one of Neoplatonists, okay, or mind of Neoplatonists. And then matter is what it is. With Neoplatonists, it's also something bad. But Neoplatonists just thought that matter is bad, but matter is passive. Matter is no force of development. With Hegel, a contradiction between mind and matter becomes the driving force of, say, development. And this connection or this contradiction between matter and spirit gives birth to finite spirit. This is to man. And man is now becomes, this is the problem of the dignity of man. Now it has another sort of connotation. The dignity of man consists not only that, as Pico della Mirandola said, that man is capable of good and bad and is like in the center of the world and is the microcosm. No. The main dignity of man is that he can understand spirit. So in him, sort of happens this self-consciousness of the world spirit, of the absolute spirit. This is the most important thing. And here's also the dignity of Hegel, because Hegel was the first to sort of express all these ideas. Before him, nobody nobody thought in this direction. Well, Christianity, well, it prepared Hegel with its idea of the Trinity and so on. Neoplatonism also prepared, but Neoplatonism, as I said to you, was like it worked in the metaphor of rising of the sun. So the sun dissipates darkness with Neoplatonists. So metaphor. So the mind or the one or the world soul, they sort of dissipate disunity or ignorance or so on. All these negative features disappear little by little, like step by step, gradually, without any revolutions or contradictions, okay? So darkness is impotent. It cannot stop light, okay? Okay, so with Hegel, it's not so. Matter is not impotent. Matter is creative also. And so matter and spirit together create this finite spirit, which is the perfection. Well, of course, here's the double negation, you know, what Engels would call the third law of dialectics, this negation of negation. Because we start with absolute spirit, then it negates itself in matter, and then matter is again negated in finite spirit. So this double negation leads to the creation of a finite spirit. Now, what did Feuerbach do with all these Hegelian dialectics? He just put it, as Marx later said, from head to foot, okay? So turned it upside down. Because, well, if we start from matter, it's the same as if we start from absolute spirit, because matter is devoid of consciousness and absolute spirit is devoid of consciousness. So if we start from matter, what will be there, what we will find? So the first principle will be matter, okay? The second principle will be consciousness or finite spirit, or like representation, as Schopenhauer will later call it. So our ability to comprehend, okay? So, somehow it appears out of matter, and by its appearance, it negates matter. And then what is the third stage with Feuerbach? The third stage is the creation of the ennobled matter, or matter subdued and perfected by this human spirit or this finite spirit. So absolute spirit just is not, we have no need of this concept of absolute spirit, and so we say goodbye to absolute spirit, and we remain only with matter, man with his self-consciousness, and then as a third stage, the matter ennobled by man. So here we have the combination of Voltairean principle and Baconian, so cultural mandate. So the task of man is to make perfect the world or matter. So we have to how to say, um, well, uh, we have to um, transform sort of matter, okay? Преобразить, transformation, yes? Well, transform matter by action of our mind, okay? So this, and here, of course, religion is, there's no religion because everything starts with inanimate matter. So God is only, how Feuerbach later put it, an idée fixe, sort of, uh, and he also aphoristically said that, well, in the Bible, it is told that God created man in his own image and likeness. But Feuerbach just ironically put it this way: man has created God in his own, man's own image and likeness. So he created anthropomorphic God, okay? Just by like expanding this idea of finite spirit and making out of it the infinite spirit. So by certain like projection, okay, we can, if we have these rules of projection, we can project finite, say, straight to infinite, say, line. Okay, so here's the same. So from finite spirit, we can make a projection. This will be infinite spirit, but it will be, well, of course, for Feuerbach, it was just a certain illusion which hampers the progress of civilization, because man having this idea of God, he works in a certain, how to say, he's somehow creating these cathedrals and say works of art, instead of creating the insurance offices or say railroads. So for Feuerbach, the task of man is to sort of quit religion and start developing, transforming the world, okay? So religion is like a hindrance. That's why it should be sort of stopped, even perhaps by force. But of course, Feuerbach was a little bit, he was not a revolutionary, so he didn't insist on, say, abolishing Christianity or any religion. Here he continued this idea of the Enlightenment, that perhaps idea itself will help itself and dissipate just by its own inner force of conviction. But Marx said no, here we shouldn't wait for people to just understand the right ideas. We should help somehow trigger this process or this progress. And so Marx developed another variant, or he was materialist like Feuerbach, but he developed another variant of Feuerbach's. Here he used this contradiction, which was, absent from, well, with Feuerbach it was there somehow, because Feuerbach was Hegelian. So some contradiction there was already in Feuerbach. But Marx sort of added additional contradiction. the economical contradiction, the contradiction between exploited and exploiters, or say uh, uh, slave owners and slaves, or landowners and peasants, or capitalists and workers. Okay, so as he called it, bourgeoisie and proletariat. Well, these are the driving forces, these contradictions between oppressed and those who oppress are a driving force of economic development and of all development, because economics, according to Marx, is the basis of all human activity. So religion, art, science even are only superficial structures based on these economic relations and economic forces. Okay, so this is interesting also way of explaining progress. But progress there is. So Marxism is not a static philosophy. Marxism is a dynamic philosophy. Okay, and with you remember that I've divided these dynamic philosophies into two parts. So one part is to this belongs Condorcet, Fichte, forgotten, Lamarck, and Auguste Comte, of whom we'll speak presently after a few minutes. So, and also there was dynamic philosophy with contradictions. And here we have Hegel, Darwin, and Marx. Well, about Darwin, we didn't speak yet, we'll speak later. So what is left is to speak about Darwin and to speak about Schopenhauer and his influence on later Darwin, and to speak about Auguste Comte. So we'll speak about these figures after a short break. Now I want to end this part of a lecture with Goethe. So I promise that I will speak about Goethe. We spoke about Heine, also a great poet. Two great, well, there are many great German poets, Gölderlin, for example, and a playwright like Schiller, of course. But we will take two. Heine just was interesting for us as an eyewitness of hidden Hegelian anti-Christian attitude, and Goethe, who was, I think, also influenced this idea of contradiction as a source of progress by his dictum, which is he attributed to Mephistopheles. I am part of this force that ever seeks evil but ever commits good. Okay, so it means that out of this like war of contradictions, or of this struggle of contradictions, there come greater good. Okay, so well, of course, this can be interpreted in say Christian way, as Goethe perhaps himself did. So you know, this idea of St. Augustine and also of Thomas Aquinas, that God can like achieve good from evil. Okay, so evil will result in some good. But with Hegel, there's no Hegel preferred not to speak about good and evil because he was afraid to spoil his reputation, and also he abstained from speaking of truth and false, or as two contradictions which struggle with each other and somehow are intimately connected with each other. So that there's nothing that can be true without some falsity. Okay, and there also nothing can be called good if it doesn't contain something bad. Okay, so here this mysticism which comes to certain obscure mystics like Boehme or even to Martin Luther, who called himself at the same time just and sinful. So these ideas of like inner connection between good and evil and true and false, of course, remained a little bit hidden by uh, by by Hegel. Well, Goethe could speak more elaboratedly on these subjects because he inserted these words into a mouth of his of Mephistopheles. So he was not like speaking from himself. And when later, when Hegel and Goethe met in Weimar in 1827, I think, they spoke about these subjects. And Goethe reprimanded Hegel for those conclusions that could be made out of his dialectics, that good and evil are the same, and that true and false are also the same. Well, and Hegel, of course, immediately sensed danger, and he answered Goethe, well, maybe some insane minds can make these conclusions, but this is all their fault. My dialectics is free of these conclusions, so only some insane persons can make these conclusions out of my philosophy. So you see how Hegel was always on his guard, and we can say kind of a hypocrite, okay? So he was like René Descartes before. He said that good lived the man who succeeded to hide himself. So Hegel tried to hide his opinions. But of course, later Engels wrote that we all understood the inner revolutionary potential of Hegelian philosophy. Only it should be just understood in a proper way. That means through the prism of materialism. Well, this is more. This is enough. Now, after the break, maybe 10 minutes, I will speak about other subjects, about first Auguste Comte and the father of positivism. Also, I will speak about Darwin and the influence of Schopenhauer on later Darwin, on Darwin's second book, The Descent of Man. Well, so now I ask you for 10 minutes of rest, okay? Okay, let's continue. We have now, we're again returned from Germany to France because we spoke about mostly Germans, Hegel, Feuerbach, Goethe, Heine, Marx. Now we return to France, with which we started with Condorcet. We started with Condorcet. Now we'll return and speak about the founder of so-called positivism, Auguste Comte. Well, positivism will be important for us in our last lecture when we'll speak about philosophy, modern philosophy of science, which usually is called post-positivism. We'll speak about Thomas Kuhn and Karl Popper, and again, there we'll find the same diversity. With Thomas Kuhn, we'll find these contradictions as a moving force of scientific progress, but with Popper, we'll find so-called cumulative approach, so that science doesn't evolve, doesn't develop by revolutions, but by successful achievements. So Auguste Comte was more close to Karl Popper here, or Karl Popper to Auguste Comte, if you want it vice versa, probably better. So Auguste Comte was a kind of a Lamarckist or Lamarckian in history of science. So he suggested also, because his philosophy was a philosophy of development, he suggested the so-called law of three stages. uh, three stages. Well, the first stage was, well, he wrote all these, his ideas were formulated in 1830. The first volume appeared, and then the last volume of the 6-volume work appeared in 1842. So, well, we can say that it was a tumultuous time for France, because we all know about the July Revolution of 1830, that monarch was dethroned, but there appeared like a republican variant of a monarch, or constitutional monarch, Louis Philippe. So the situation after the July Revolution was more stable than after the Great French Revolution, so no terror was took place, and well, France was able to develop more or less, I would say, uh, uh, peacefully in those years. And perhaps this explains, if we would take a materialistic view, that the being influences conscious or determines consciousness, then we can say that this peaceful development of France during those years was like prompted Comte to take this also peaceful idea of peaceful progress. Okay, so these stages, religious, metaphysical, and scientific, religious, metaphysical, and physical and scientific, these stages did not sort of succeed each other by revolutions of kind. So there was no revolution that led from religious to metaphysical stage, or from metaphysical to scientific stage. Well, more or less, as we also spoke in our course, we avoided these revolutions, tried to like pacify the contradictions, make all this picture of history of science look uh, peaceful enough. Okay, but well, with Marx and Hegel, of course, this approach would be criticized, because they saw contradictions and revolutions everywhere, as also Thomas Kuhn in his famous work, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. But now we'll just take the attitude of Comte. So Comte regarded the development of humankind as a development of a single man. So, say a child starts from from religious stage. He animates his dolls, for example, speaks with them. He animates everything. He doesn't understand the difference between animate and inanimate nature. And also, a child is by its nature religious. He believes in Father Frost or Santa Claus, or say evil spirits, and he is easily to be frightened by, well, in Russian they say Baba Yaga, but maybe it's like witch, a kind of a witch or demon. Okay, so and then when he becomes an adolescent, a child becomes, well, when he becomes an adolescent, he becomes to be interested in philosophical, or we say metaphysical problems. What is good and what is evil? What is justice and what is injustice? Um, uh, well, as for example, Mark Zaretsky wrote me that slavery is unjust. Well, this is a metaphysical position, though. So what is just and what is unjust? Okay, from the point of view of Hegel or Marx, well, this is slavery is just a stage. So we cannot speak about justice and injustice here, because we can speak only about economic relations, which are sort of which it's certain the great defect of slavery, according to Karl Marx, was not that slavery was unjust, but that the slavery slowed down the development of economic relations. We can say that Koyré was not didn't hold the opinion of Comte. When Alexandre Koyré, our compatriot emigrant from Russia, spoke about scientific revolution of the 17th century, he was, I think, like repeating some Marxist concepts, or Hegelian. And later, this scientific revolution, this term was sort of taken by Thomas Kuhn and developed in his work, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. So here we have these two approaches, okay? The approach of positivists and the approach of Comte and his follower Pierre Duhem, who said that, also positivist of the second generation, who regarded all the progress of human sciences as just peaceful and step-by-step evolution without any revolutions. And Pierre Duhem, for example, was the first to sort of shed light on such figures as medieval philosophers or Buridan, Albert of Saxony, Nicolas Orem, and Leonardo da Vinci, also as predecessors of Galileo. So he always, like Darwin, Darwin himself, but also like Lamarck, for example, he always was seeking intermediate stages, okay? Well, with Darwin, it was also struggle for life. But according to Auguste Comte and say Pierre Duhem and Karl Popper even, there is no struggle for life in science. Science develops peacefully, okay? So by work of some geniuses that make important discoveries that sort of give new light and inspiration. Well, to a certain extent, the same was the attitude of Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon also didn't speak of revolutions. He spoke about also enlightening mission of reason, human reason. So when we speak about enlightening, we use, more or less explicitly or implicitly, the metaphor of the sun, that the sunrise, okay? So now with the revolutions, it's like more metaphor of an earthquake, okay, than of sunrise, okay? So there's like a dichotomy of the beautiful and the sublime, okay? So the beautiful sunrise and the sublime earthquake, okay? So revolution is sublime, evolution is beautiful, okay? Well, so let's continue with Comte. So this metaphysical stage is characteristic of a man when he becomes like a youth or not grown up, but just a youngster, okay? And he's preoccupied with the problems of good and evil, just and unjust, say truth and falsity, and he seeks also meaning of life, the purpose of it all, and other metaphysics. He sort of seeks other answers for other metaphysical questions. But when he becomes a grown-up and is already a father of a family and has to provide for his family, he has to earn money, so he sort of says goodbye to all these metaphysical pursuits and starts to work hard in order to get a salary and to sort of procreate children and give education to the children already procreated, okay? So if he has, say, like me, already grandsons and granddaughters, then he becomes quiet and lives in the so-called fourth stage, which is called sociological. well, the stage of the golden age of humanity, when every social evils would be conquered by human reason, like crime or prostitution, prostitution, racial and social inequalities. All these problems will be solved because people would understand the mysteries of psychology and sociology, the laws governing psychology, behavior of individual men and the whole societies, and so it would be possible to construct or educate people in such a way that they would live peacefully with each other. This will be the fourth stage, which is only sort of to be desired. But according to Kant, 19th century is the dawn of the third stage. It's called scientific, when man, as Mill, a contemporary and correspondent of Mill, John Stuart Mill, called it utilitarian approach or practical approach, or later they will call pragmatic approach to nature. So just to sort of establish ourselves firmly in this world. And because metaphysical questions only hamper people to receive these pragmatic goals, so they are to be sort of overcome. So man has to overcome these metaphysical questions, understand that they are fruitless and they cannot be answered, and that it is just better to leave them alone, okay? Well, this is the idea of Kant. So three stages. He was not against religion, like, say, most of those figures of the 18th century Enlightenment, who saw in religion only superstition and something negative. Well, Kant said that religious stage was to a certain extent necessary, and we shouldn't just be develop enmity against that which is necessary. So it was necessary for its time, okay? So a necessary sort of epoch or a necessary stage, without which mankind wouldn't reach metaphysical stage. Because what is metaphysical stage? It is the sublimation or refinement of religious ideas such as God, justice, good, bad. All these ideas can be found in religion, but in religion they are concrete. We speak about concrete goodness, concrete justice. We speak about concrete realities. For example, Moses delivering Jews from Egyptian slavery, and that becomes the content of religion. With a metaphysical stage like we have in Thomas Aquinas or René Descartes, we have this abstract idea of justice as such, or slavery as such, or God as such, and even that led to this protest of Pascal, who said that I don't want to believe in God of philosophers and scientists. I prefer God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Well, in Kant's terms, that will be a return to the first stage. So a man doesn't want to remain on the metaphysical stage. He wants to return back to the previous religious stage. And of course, for Kant, it was like a sign of moral insanity or instability. And at the same time, there appeared dissertation or a monograph of a French psychiatrist, Lelout, which gave the Lelout, Louis-François Lelout. I'm sorry, Lelout. Louis François, I think, a French psychiatrist who, well, at the times of Kant, just gave a diagnosis of psychic disorder to Blaise Pascal. So I have this monograph. It can be um, loaded through Gallica library, French National Library, called the site is called Gallica. So Francois. Well, just it is an illustration. You see how that people, of course, couldn't understand how such a prominent scientist and thinker as Pascal could look with nostalgia on a religious stage. Okay, so they explained it as a kind of a psychological or psychiatric disorder. Okay, so for Kant, rational man should develop progressively, and here he will prove that he's healthy, both physically and psychologically. So we shouldn't return back to these previous stages, or either they would be infantilism of a kind, and we should develop progressively. And how, so we can more or less understand how out of religious stage came metaphysical stage. Uh, yes, Anastasia, yes. So, yes, this is exactly my fault. Um, So I will write to everybody. Lelou, this is a French psychiatrist, the contemporary of Auguste Comte. He wrote a book on Pascal, and John Stuart Mill, who just was a pen friend of Auguste Comte, but preferred not to use the term positivistic, but to use the term utilitarian. Okay, so he's a father of so-called utilitarianism. Okay, but later that will be called by American philosopher Dewey or Peirce pragmatism. Okay, well, this is more or less the same: positivism, utilitarianism, and pragmatism. So this is the well, how from you become a pragmatic out of metaphysician? How can it happen? So metaphysical pursuits, like pursuits of medieval schoolmen or rationalists like Descartes and Spinoza, led to scientific progress because they sort of sharpened the intellect of those who meddled into these metaphysical discussions, and created the higher intellectual level in the universities, for example, by interest in logic. You remember William Ockham, Sum of All, or Summary of All Logic, and other logicians. So they were all developing in this metaphysical stage, because metaphysical stage does not sort of is very well compatible with logic and mathematics. And so out of this logics and mathematics, which was cultivated during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance period, there comes first scientific discoveries like that of Galileo, of Descartes himself, even of Pascal, notwithstanding his getting religion, okay? And Grimaldi and Boscovich, also notwithstanding his being a Catholic priest and a Jesuit. So every kind of man can develop this science, but so science peacefully comes out of metaphysics, like Aphrodite comes peacefully out of the sea, okay, of sea waves, okay. So here is nothing revolutionary. So everybody has its place. Everybody is good to a certain extent, and for his epoch can be even progressive. But of course, the third stage, the scientific stage, is better, but not the best. The best will be the fourth stage, which Kant called sociological. So I've already told you. Um, Okay, so now we'll spoke enough about Kant, and we'll show the slides. Marina can help me to share the slides which remained unshared during this 1 hour. So please, Marina, just start with the yes. This will be later. We will I will elaborate on Schopenhauer later. Darwin a little bit later. Yes. Now, next slide, please. Okay. Okay. Also later. So, uh, yes. Here, also later a little bit. So, uh, no.
Okay, what do you want me to show?
No, the next slide. Okay, so we'll just look through the slide. Okay, what here is the thing that I wanted to show, but unfortunately I couldn't. But so this is Ludwig Feuerbach. Now we can see his portrait because we spoke a lot about him as an intermediate link between Hegel and Marx. And to a certain extent, Feuerbach was of the same opinion as Auguste Comte. He said that the aim of mankind is transforming nature. And this is more or less the same as a scientific stage of Auguste Comte. So nature transformed by man's spirit, okay? Now, it is, of course, a collective work. It is not a work on an individual. So here, as with Neoplatonists and with Hegel, individual means nothing. Individual only partakes in the work of humanity. And as Neoplatonists said, when we think, we partake in, how to say, universal reason or universal mind. And here we see in the dissertation or thesis produced by Feuerbach in his youth, he was only 84 years old. Oh, no, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. He was only 24 years old when he produced this text in Latin. You remember the thesis were to be defended in Latin in many German universities, and the University of Erlangen, where Ludwig Feuerbach defended his work. So he wrote it in Latin. Perhaps this is the last example of Latin in philosophical works. After that, with Nietzsche, with Schopenhauer, with Freud, we'll find, or with Marx, we'll find no instances of Latin, okay? So here is the last Latin phrase, and it is interesting if we compare it with Descartes. You remember Descartes, his famous motto, cogito ergo sum. And here it's written cum cogito desi esse individuum. So when I think, I cease to become an individual. So when I'm thinking, I'm not an individual because I partake in the universal mind, okay? So my lecture, for example, according to Feuerbach, is not my lecture. I partake somehow in the universal mind, universal intellect. And so this work of mine is a work of, say, the intellect of humankind or humanity, or the intellect even of higher sort of spheres. Well, at that time when Feuerbach defended his thesis, he was not yet a materialist. He only started to become a materialist. So here we can see these words as a also expression of Neoplatonic or Hegelian philosophy. So when you think, you are not an individual. So thinking is a collective phenomenon, okay? Well, this is interesting. Now, have we any other slides after that? Marina? Yes, here. Here's the Feuerbach wrote to Hegel. You see the date, November 22nd of November, 1828. So If we remember that Feuerbach was born in 1804, so he was only 24 years old. So here, of course, Hegel was a celebrity, and in approaching his 60s, he was 58, Feuerbach was a young man. Okay, so and he writes, of course, with a lot of politeness. He's in German. Ich nehme mir die Freiheit, so I take the liberty подарить вам мою I'm sorry, to give you my to how to say yes, to present you,
Present.
yes, my dissertation. Okay, present, or to like подарить with there's also a word how do you say подарить, подарок? Well,
To give as a gift.
Gift, yes, to give as a gift, yes. So I give you as a gift my dissertation. Okay, well, I can say, well, yes. So here's the letter. Okay, so I found it in original German. Well, now well, to schicken, it's not to give as a gift, but to send, maybe also can be translated. Well, now the second, on the right, we have a preface to Ludwig Feuerbach's work about Christianity, the essence of Christianity. And you can see this underlined by yellow, that Christianity has, in fact, fell not only from reason but from mankind, that it is nothing more than idea fix with flagrant contradiction with our fire and insurance companies, our railroads. You remember our picture and sculpture galleries, industrial schools, theaters, and science. So Christianity is fading away, and so the epoch, or the epoch, or the stage of Christianity is going well, leaving. So that's perhaps also can be interpreted in terms of Auguste Comte. So Christianity played its role. Now it should cease, give place to science, to industrial schools, to railroads, and so on. What are these railroads, fire and insurance companies? They are the creation of the human spirit. So they are the examples how man's spirit can ennoble or transform inanimate nature. Okay. Well, do we have anything else, Marina, or not? Here, this we have already seen.
Yes,
So
I think nothing
yes.
more on Feuerbach.
Okay, that's okay. So now we'll start with another figure, with Schopenhauer. So you can show us Schopenhauer, how he looks like. Schopenhauer. Yes, yes, okay. You see, not very pleasant. Non Vladimir Solov. No, just show us Schopenhauer, and I will just introduce you who he is. Maybe some of you already know Schopenhauer. He was born in the city of Gdansk, which at that time was a Polish city, but soon became a German city for more than 150 years, or about 150 years. So, but at that time, they were the last days that Gdansk was a Polish city. I don't know whether he was called, I think, Gdansk at that time, then he became German Danzig. Well, of course, it has a German minority, a German population. So Arthur Schopenhauer was no Pole. He was a German, a son of a German merchant. So 1688, that's his date of birth. And then what happened in 18 1905, his father committed suicide, and perhaps this tragedy left a certain impression on Schopenhauer, and he became pessimistic. His relations with his mother were strained, although his mother introduced him, because she lived in Weimar and was an acquaintance of Goethe. She introduced him to Schopenhauer to Goethe, and Schopenhauer gave to Goethe his published work, the first variant, the first edition of his work. Um, um, this is on will and represent the world as will and representation. Well, this work also helped to create the intellectual atmosphere that helped Darwin later to promote his ideas. And well, they developed independently. I mean, Schopenhauer and Darwin. So when Darwin's work appeared, The Origin of Species, it contained no links to Schopenhauer. Perhaps Darwin was at that time ignorant of Schopenhauer, and Schopenhauer remained to his last days an obscure figure. Nobody gave, well, Goethe, of course, received favorably the work of a young man, because Goethe was, you know, very of noble nature. He wanted to inspire young people and to say give compliments to them. And he said to his secretary, well, after Schopenhauer gave me his work, I will have a nice reading for half a year. So he planned to read it page by page, but not just devouring it, you know, in one night, but just to taste it like good wine or cognac, okay? I don't know what happened out of Goethe's acquaintance with the book of Schopenhauer, so there were no remarks. Perhaps he was a little bit disillusioned with Schopenhauer or couldn't understand what was he aiming at. Because with Schopenhauer, we have these contradictions already, as with Hegel somehow, but they were enemies, Schopenhauer and Hegel, but shared the same attitude that in nature there's a constant struggle between will and blind nature, which opposes will. So will is like a passion within every creature, even inanimate, to survive and to also to reproduce itself. And we can call it will. And representation, it's well, perhaps it is a translation of the German word, but it means also consciousness. So when we represent the world, it means that we have this consciousness, we see the world. The brutes, the inanimate nature, they doesn't see it. They are, as you remember, nature creata et non creans. So it's mineral nature. It is devoid of consciousness. So consciousness comes to a stage only with man. And according to Schopenhauer, it brings unhappiness to man, because he becomes conscious of his own imminent death. And this is a tragedy for every man, to understand that he will sooner or later die or be annihilated, because Schopenhauer didn't believe in a future life. Okay, he was an atheist. That's why everybody call Schopenhauer's philosophy pessimistic. And Schopenhauer himself used to say that we live in the worst of all possible worlds, maybe sort of alluding to Leibniz dictum that we live in the best possible worlds. So in the worst of all possible worlds. So this is, well, of course, just a phrase, but the main idea of Schopenhauer is the idea first of development, because out of this will, which is inherent to all the creatures, to all living and non-living beings, is somehow also becomes more and more sort of uh, uh, well, I can say uh, subtle. In this will, in say in electricity or magnetism, we can also find this will. For example, with a magnet, a will to attract the iron. But with the plants, we also find this will, a will to grow and make seeds and sort of procreate itself by distributing seeds everywhere. With animals, we also have still more developed will, because animals have emotions. And with man, we have the finest the last stage of the development of this universal will. But here, because it comes in contradiction with the idea of representation, with consciousness, this will becomes tragic, because man can see that in spite of his will to survival, he is doomed to death. And this contradiction between life and death, will to life and imminent death, brings a tragedy. Well, this is a kind of a dialectics of with we find in Schopenhauer. Not, of course, Hegelian dialectics, but still some kind of dialectics and some kind of the idea of development. Well, at first, as I told you, Darwin did not pay any attention to Schopenhauer. But in his second book, he already mentions Schopenhauer by name. And I can show you, please, Marina will show us, I think, this slide where we have Darwin with, yes, here's The Origin of Species, the first book of Darwin. You also, before I pass to the next slide, you see in the struggle for life, the preservation of favored traces in the struggle for life. So you see, with Marx, we have class struggle. With Darwin, we have struggle for life. It, well, for a certain, in a certain sense, it is akin to Schopenhauer's concept of will for life, okay, and has some connections with it. Now, please, the next slide. We will see at last. Yes, here, here we have. Um, No, here's a, yes, here's an article in the Journal of Anthropology, which is called Schopenhauer and Darwinism. It appeared in 1871, and the author of this article is David Asher. He's a Jew living, I think, in England, and also fluent in English and in German, because he is of German origin. So he knew both languages, English and German. He was a fan of Schopenhauer philosophy and a fan of Darwin. And so he wrote an article in this Journal of Anthropology about the kinship between Schopenhauer and Darwinism, especially in the question of sexual love, a sexual instinct. You see, here it is. Well, now a next slide will show you us, I think, yes, here's the page 586 of the work The Descent of Man. This is the second work of Charles Darwin. He wrote many books. For example, he described his cruise on the Beagle. But here is chiefly remembered for his two works. first work I've shown you already, The Origin of Species, and the second work is The Descent of Man. So the descent of man and the role of and the selection according to sex. So selection according to sex is a driving force of the descent of man. Well, you can Darwin gives many examples how this selection according to sex happens. Well, it can be illustrated by the example of fish, when the strongest and most movable fish manages to sort of um, fertilize the caviar, okay? So those fishes who are less swift, they come, of course, they try to fertilize, but this is futile because the caviar is already fertilized by the winner, by the fish that comes first, male fish that comes first, okay? So, well, with birds also, with animals, this fights for between males for a female and so on. Well, he stands close to fights between men for a woman, but because he was a Victorian, this was a Victorian age, and Darwin was not eager to scandalize his wife and his immediate surrounding, he abstained from just transferring this formalism to the world of humans, okay? But still you see, he mentions Schopenhauer, and also he cites this work, Schopenhauer and Darwinism, in the journal Anthropology. It means that he read it attentively and inserts it in his maybe second edition of The Descent of Man. So Schopenhauer, this name appears in the work of Darwin. So we can speak about some influence of Schopenhauer's ideas on Darwinism. Well, and of course, he recognized by mentioning Schopenhauer that there is some kinship between the ideas of Schopenhauer and his own. So this problem is now sort of valid from the, I can say, intellectually respectable, this comparison of Schopenhauer and Darwin. Okay, so what time do we have? Yes, you can stop the presentation now, Marina. So we have, I want also maybe 3 minutes of interruption, and then we'll come to Nietzsche and to other slides which bear the long desired affinity or influence of Indian philosophy on European philosophy. This influence comes through Schopenhauer and Nietzsche. And now just 3 minutes. Well, let's finish our lecture. And Marina, please, can you show us this book, the Upanishads in Latin, which I think the presentation begins with this slide, or we'll find it. Yes, okay, thank you. No, the previous slide, yes. No, the previous one. Okay, here. Yes, here it is. Upnekat, which is in Upanishads, or in Russian Upanishady, where if there are some people from India, they will surely recognize this work, which it was translated by a French scientist Duperron from Persian language, or from Farsi into Latin, and published in 1801 in Paris, okay? Well, it is not Paris, it's perhaps, yes, in Paris, yes, also. So, what is that? uh, how was it achieved? This work. You remember that French had some colonies in India. Later, they were evacuated because the English were victorious over Napoleon. So French had to leave India. But in the 18th century, there were some flourishing French enclaves or colonies in India, where also French missionaries, for example, Jesuits, worked to convert the Indians to Christianity. But also these missionaries started to learn, um, uh, well, Sanskrit or different languages of. Yes, okay. So there's a lot of them, yes, Upanishads, yes. So, but, well, I don't know from what text this translation was made, but it was made from Persian language, because Persian language or Farsi was the lingua franca of India, because you remember with India we have this difficulty that Indians who live in the south of Indostan Peninsula do not understand the Indians who live in the north. So there are, well, they say about 200 different languages belonging sometimes to different language groups. So India had to find the common language which could be understood by all. So before English became this common language as it is now in India, this role was played by Persian language or Farsi. So that's why many um, key uh, Indian religious texts or philosophical texts, because philosophy was closely connected with religion in India, they were translated first to the Persian language. And so it helped this French scientist who was closely connected with Jesuit missionaries uh, to translate it. So because he knew Persian language, so or Farsi, he could make this translation. So of course, this double translation from not from Sanskrit but from Parsi. So at first it was translated by someone into Persian language and then to Latin. And because Schopenhauer was an educated man and he could read Latin, like Hegel, you remember. So they were all these Germans were great connoisseurs of Latin. So for him it was easy to read it in Latin, and he kept it always on his table. This is the influence of the proof of the influence of Indian philosophy on Schopenhauer. Well, why was it so crucial for Schopenhauer to study Indian philosophy? Because he wanted to find a solution of this tragic situation in which a man found himself. So he wanted to understand how different civilizations managed to overcome this tragic situation, that a man has inside himself a will for life and even a sexual desire for procreation. And at the same time, he understands the futility of his sexual desires, of his general will for survival or instinct for preservation, because of this imminent death, which will put an end not only to himself, but also to his sons and daughters and grandsons and granddaughters, and eventually to all human race. So this death will reign after all, okay? So after even the social, as we, if we remember Kant, out of the after the sociological phase still will come death, and death will not spare even the sociologist or a scientist or a metaphysician or even a religious man. But religion has some soothing effect because it promises some kind of life after death. So, and also religion helps man to practice asceticism. So, well, Schopenhauer himself could not sort of return to religion as Pascal did. Just perhaps he was afraid to become mad. Okay, so he understood that perhaps this was a too crazy solution for him just to become a religious man. Well, he sometimes, well, he kept a portrait of one of the Catholic religious leaders, about well, Abbot, um, or the founder of the Trappist order, Abbot de Rancé, and he kept his portrait in his studio. But he said, well, and his friend asked him, why do not you become a Trappist monk, for example, convert to Catholicism and become a Trappist monk, like this abbot, whose portrait you keep in your study? And he said, well, this is for this grace is needed. So I have no grace of faith, you see. So I cannot believe because just I have no possibility to believe. So I have no grace to believe. Okay, so I'm an unbeliever, unfortunately. So perhaps I would be more fortunate if I had a grace to become a believer. But nevertheless, he became an atheist with ascetic tendencies. So he, remaining an atheist, he borrowed some ascetic practices from every religion, not only from Indian religion, where of course you can find a lot of examples of asceticism, but also from Buddhist religion and also from Christian religion, and at that time, mainly from Catholic religion, because Protestants, starting from Martin Luther, they criticized, say, uh, monks and all ascetics and celibates, celibacy, because they said that it is unnatural. Well, for Schopenhauer, it was not unnatural because man himself is in an unnatural situation. So this problem of natural and unnatural sort of loses its meaning, okay? Because we are all in a tragic situation. So tragic solutions like celibacy or asceticism may be the way out of, or somehow an attempt to come out, or somehow to soothe this tragedy of our existence. Like there are soothing medicines like opium or other drugs, okay? So this is kind of a drug, okay? This ascetic literature which he devoured not only Christian but also India. Well, this is the example of this influence. Now we can, can you show us another slides, Marina? Yes, uh, yes, this is about asceticism with Schopenhauer. So you see, this is a page from his work here, when he puts on this La Vie de Rancé. You remember we spoke about the history of Saint Elizabeth. This is what Schopenhauer read and what he suggests us to read. The English Protestant John Bunyan, um, the French reformer of the Trappist order, Cistercian order, Abbot de Rancé, history of Saint Elizabeth, and Chateaubriand, the genius of Christianity, and also around quietism in the works of Brahmanism and Buddhism. Okay, so you see what this is, what he suggests us as a medicine against this tragic life. Okay, tragedy of life, which will end by imminent death. And here is also um, mm, this is also a citation from Schopenhauer, where it is, you see, by the expression of asceticism, which I have already used so often, I understand it in the sense of this deliberate breaking of the will by refusing the agreeable and looking for the disagreeable, the voluntarily chosen way of life of penance and self-chastisement and mortification of the will. Okay, this is the program which Schopenhauer sort of suggests to everybody. Anastasia asks me whether Schopenhauer followed himself this way of asceticism. Well, to some extent, he was imperfect. You remember this dialogue with uh, this dialogue with a friend who later wrote the biography of Schopenhauer. He said, "This is the work of grace. So I don't have enough grace." Well, maybe it's a joke, you know, because he didn't believe in God. So how could he believe in grace? Because grace is a gift of God. So, but maybe just it was his way of paradoxical expression. So he said, "I have no grace, so I cannot be a good ascetic or a monk because I don't have enough, maybe enough strong will for that." Or, but he maybe he didn't practice it himself, but he showed us the way, sort of like a prophet. Okay. Well, this is the beginning, and now we can, if we see another slide, maybe with Shiva. Yes, you see this Shiva with 5 faces. Why it is so? What is the mystery of this 5-faced Shiva? Well, they say that uh, when the first woman was created by, not by Shiva, but maybe by other deity, um, uh, Shiva was so fell in love with this first woman, and she started to dance all around him, and so he wanted to follow this woman, the first woman. Well, in Christian tradition we call her Eve. Well, I don't know the name of this woman in India, how she's called. Maybe the Indians will help me. But what I know from also, I think it's common knowledge, that Shiva wanted to follow her by his gaze in order not to just sort of turn his head. He created another 4 heads. So he had all in all 5 heads, so that he could follow with his gaze this first woman from in every direction. Okay, that's I think this is the this statue is in present India, so you see this quite, I think, contemporary photo. Okay, now this next slide where um, yes, here is also some what some citation from Schopenhauer, which in which he sort of seems to praise Indian religion above Christianity. He writes this sentence: "In India, our religions will never at any time take root. The ancient wisdom of the human race will not be supplanted by the events in Galilee, so by Christianity. On the contrary, Indian wisdom flows back to Europe and will produce a fundamental change in our knowledge and thought." So this is like a prophecy about so-called Indian Renaissance. So you remember the Renaissance in Italy started with Greek language and Greek knowledge and Greek manuscripts. Now Schopenhauer prophesizes the Indian Renaissance when manuscripts from India, starting with Upanishads and Vedas, other Vedas. So they will be little by little translated. Also, the Buddhist texts will be translated first in Latin, then perhaps in English, in French, in other languages, in Russian also, and will produce a very a radical change in our in our world picture. Okay, so in this way I will answer to my critic from India among my students who says that I ignored completely the Indian philosophy. And next slide will show us that I do not ignore either uh, Russian philosophy. We'll find Vladimir Solovyov here. Yes, here is a Russian philosopher, Vladimir Solovyov, who was strongly influenced by Schopenhauer, but he tried to find a solution like Blaise Pascal in returning to Christian religion. So this was a way out for him out of this contradiction or tragic situation in which, according to Schopenhauer, man finds himself. So Vladimir Solovyov, a son of a famous Russian historian, Sergei Mikhailovich Solovyov, underwent a certain deconversion from Christianity to atheism when he was 14 years old. And for a couple of years he remained a materialist. And he even tried to throw out the icons from his home or from his private studio. Maybe he was punished for that by his father, who was a prominent scientist and like a despot in the family. But I don't know the circumstances exactly. But what I know and what we all know by the autobiographical sketches of Vladimir Solovyov is that he underwent again a conversion at that time, conscientious or just conscious conversion to Christianity at the age of 16 or 17 by reading Spinoza. It seems curious, but Spinoza helped helped Solovyov to return to kind of idealism and then to Christianity, because Christianity is intimately connected with idealist philosophy. Well, he became a Christian throughout his life, and so maybe it will disappoint somebody of you that Russian philosophy is represented here by a Christian philosopher, but because we have atheistic philosophers also, like Michael Bakunin, the father of anarchism. Well, or Leo Tolstoy, who took a very controversial position vis-a-vis Christianity and was even excommunicated from the Russian Orthodox Church. But also we have Vladimir Solovyov, who also wrote, like Schopenhauer, on the meaning of love. But if Schopenhauer insisted that love is a biological instinct at its core, and that made him akin to the ideas of Charles Darwin, that love is in the core of each human love, there is a biological instinct of self-preservation and sexual desire, okay? So this is a materialistic point of view according to Solovyov. So Solovyov enters into polemics with this understanding, materialistic understanding of love, and he produces his own idealistic explanation of love in terms of Platonic philosophy, like kinship of souls. So it's not the problem of body, it's not the problem even of procreation, it's a problem of kinship of souls. If your soul is tuned to my way of thinking, then I can love you and you can love me. If we are in ideological warfare then we cannot love each other because you are my opponents, okay? You think in other way than me, okay? So, well, yes, we can say also that Spinoza's works can be interpreted in many ways, okay? So here is an example. If we believe, of course, Solovyov, that he interpreted Spinoza in an idealistic sense. Well, of course, Hegel also can be interpreted in idealistic sense. If we didn't have these facts that Hegel was an enemy of Christianity, so of course you could become Christian by reading Hegel, but it's not so easy, you know. Spinoza, well, also in private letters, um, uh, just spoke critically about Christianity and Christian dogmas. So, well, maybe Solovyov didn't read these private letters of Spinoza, but read only his major work like Ethics, where, of course, Spinoza tried to not scandalize his Dutch compatriots in any way. You understand. Well, of course, later Solovyov switched to Plato and Dostoevsky as sources of inspiration. And also he, we can speak a lot about Solovyov, but it's not part of our, it will lead us in the far from the direction of history and philosophy of science. Here I introduce this character for two reasons. First reason is that it is some reaction to Schopenhauer's philosophy and to Darwin also. And secondly, because I was, it was reproached by my Indian student for not paying attention to Indian philosophy and to Russian philosophy. So now we just had Indian philosophy a little bit, and now we have a piece of Russian philosophy. So, and please, Marina, show us the work of Solovyov on the meaning of love. You see, it is translated into English, so you can read it in English if you do not want to read it in Russian, or you are not Russians, okay. So, of course, in Russian original, it maybe it looks it's better, but who knows? Philosophical works are not works of poetry, so they can easily be translated into other languages. Well, so there are some slides remaining with Nietzsche. Well, you see, with Nietzsche, we have only 10 minutes or 8 minutes for Nietzsche, but we'll find this. There's a slide with Nietzsche. Okay. Here, this is from Zarathustra. This holy man in his forest has heard nothing of this yet, that God is dead. Here is the famous phrase from Zarathustra by Nietzsche. Well, we can speak about Nietzsche for hours because he's very famous and very influential in in contemporary world. Maybe we'll speak about him when we'll speak about the philosophy of science in the 20th century, so-called postmodernist approach to science, but heavily influenced by Nietzsche. But now I only want to direct your attention to the image of Zarathustra. So Zarathustra, of course, with Nietzsche, it's a prophet of Superman. And Superman is regarded in very Darwinian perspective, that Superman is the outcome of the continuation of evolution. So evolution started with apes, or with not apes, but with the worms. Then worms produced apes. Well, you understand, it's should be taken poetically. Biologists, please excuse me. So worms produced apes, apes produced man, and man is something imperfect because he has too much of apes in himself, maybe even more than the ape itself, as sarcastically sort of mentions Nietzsche in Zarathustra. So the task of mankind is to produce a superman, so a new stage in planetary evolution. Now about Zarathustra himself. Why is he named Zarathustra? So Zarathustra is a personage from Iranian folklore, from Iranian religion, the religion of black and white, of evil and good, of two principles which are ever fighting with each other, Armuz and Ariman. Okay, so now you recognize the thing with which we started, so that there are two types of philosophers. With one philosopher, the principle of good always overcomes the evil, because the principle of good is much more powerful than the principle of the opposing evil. Like sun, light is much more powerful than darkness, which is dissipated by the sunlight. Okay, with the other uh, part is Hegelian and Marxist dialectics. It says that, well, we cannot say that good is more powerful than evil, and evil perhaps can also be used to achieve some good results. Okay, but evil is the principle of the same power as good, and these contradictions, we cannot say that one part of these contradictory ideas is better than another. So we, this contradiction presupposes equalness of these contradictions. So this is exactly the religion of Persians, this religion of Avesta, of which the major prophet was Zarathustra. So when Nietzsche took this name, he did it on purpose, just to underline that in real nature, there is always a fight between two principles, good and evil, and they are to some extent equal. And the last idea is that Zarathustra is an ascetic. He lives on the mountain alone for 10 years. And in this way, he reminds the Indian god Shiva, who also lives on Kailas mountain, surrounded by eternal snow and ice. Okay, so, and this asceticism leads us to the last, I think, idea, the idea of sublimation of sexual energy. This is also a solution, perhaps overlooked by Schopenhauer, but perhaps Schopenhauer tended to that this asceticism can lead not only to escape from this tragedy of life, but also to some positive result, the sublimation of the sexual energy, which leads to resumed creative activity. And here we see that from the images of Nietzsche and Zarathustra, because Zarathustra compares himself with a vessel which is overflown with honey, like a cup which is overflowing. You see, it's very sexual. But Freud would call it a sexually laden image. Okay, that's overflowing of some overfilled cup. Okay, so or he compares himself also with a bee that wants to lead somewhere the honey which she collected. Okay, so Freud will speak about Freud, I think, when we'll come to the science of the 20th century, whether there will be, of course, a question whether Freud can be called a scientist because there are some reservations about that. Karl Popper gave us some reservations that Freudian concept is not falsifiable, cannot be falsified, that perhaps this is not a science, but there are other views on Freudianism and psychoanalysis, so we'll speak about that later. Today, I think it's enough. So I want to thank Marina for her help in showing us the slides and conducting this conference. There was a tumultuous beginning when I was thrown out of Zoom several times. It can be, of course, compared with the invasion of Napoleon troops to Jena, which barely costed Hegel his life. But of course, it's not the valid comparison because my life was not threatened. Only this lecture was threatened. You understand? So we live all in tumultuous times, of course, in tragic times, if we take the metaphor of Schopenhauer. But somehow we should continue with asceticism or without asceticism. We have to continue, and I will give you last two lectures next week, I hope. So then we'll sum up our course and come to the exams. Okay, the exams will start, as I remind you, on the 2nd of December. So in between the 9th and the 10th lectures. Okay, and of course you will have enough time to load your third and fourth essay and fifth and sixth. So because the last date is 24th of December. So we have almost a month at our disposal. I think we'll finish everything. Okay. Thank you, Marina. Thank
Thank
everybody.
you.
Yes. And wish you good day. Yes. So
Thank you very much.
yes, thank you all for listening and for inspiring me.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll just, I think, finish this lecture.
Thank you, Professor. Have a good evening. Bye, everyone.
Nice day. Okay, till next week.